But the reason behind this unexpected act left everyone speechless. What was seen as an attack revealed a secret that forever changed that community. And the ending? It's simply unbelievable. Subscribe to the channel and discover how this story took a completely unexpected turn. Nestled between the towering mountains of Montana, where the wind carried whispers of ancient tales, the small community of Whispering Pines celebrated another successful harvest festival. The September air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of pine and the promise of an early autumn. Children ran freely through meadows dotted with wildflowers, their laughter echoing against the mountainsides that had watched over generations of families. The Mitchell family had lived in Whispering Pines for 3 generations. Sarah Mitchell, a widowed botanist who dedicated her life to studying the diverse flora of the surrounding wilderness, raised her 10-year-old son Ethan with the same reverence for nature that had been instilled in her. Ethan inherited his mother's curious eyes and her passion for adventure, often venturing just beyond the permitted boundaries to explore hidden creeks and uncharted trails. "Mum, did you know that the markings on those rocks by Silver Creek look just like the ones in your old books?" Ethan asked one evening as Sarah prepared their modest cabin for the upcoming festivities. Sarah smiled, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Those markings have been there for centuries, honey. The elders say they're messages from the forest itself, guiding those who know how to listen. Do you think the animals can read them too?" Ethan's eyes widened with childlike wonder. Sarah chuckled. "Nature speaks in many languages, Ethan. Maybe some creatures understand more than we give them credit for." Little did they know how prophetic those words would become. The Autumn Equinox Festival was Whispering Pines' most cherished tradition. Every year, the entire community gathered in Founder's Clearing, a wide meadow encircled by ancient pines that seemed to stand guard over the celebration. Tables overflowed with homemade pies, freshly baked bread, and stews that had simmered all day. String lights hung between trees, creating a canopy of stars below the actual constellations that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Robert "Bobby" Anderson, the town's unofficial historian and Sarah's childhood friend, raised his glass to make the traditional toast. His booming voice silenced the cheerful chatter. "To another year of abundance, to the mountains that protect us, and to the spirits of the forest that guide us." "To the spirits," echoed the crowd, clinking glasses and mugs together. Margaret Wilson, the oldest resident of Whispering Pines at 93 years, sat in her place of honor near the central bonfire. Her weathered face, etched with deep lines that mapped a life lived in harmony with the wilderness, broke into a gentle smile as she watched the children play. Her eyes, however, held a hint of concern as they scanned the surrounding tree line. "The animals have been restless lately," she commented to Sarah, who had brought her a plate of food. "The birds sing different songs, and the deer have changed their paths." Sarah nodded respectfully. Margaret's connection to the natural world was legendary in their community. Some called it superstition. Others, like Sarah, recognized it as wisdom, accumulated through decades of observation. "Ethan mentioned seeing unusual tracks by the eastern ridge," Sarah replied. "Larger than a wolf's," he said. Margaret's gaze sharpened. "The Guardians have been absent for many years. Perhaps they've returned." Before Sarah could inquire further, the music grew louder. Fiddles and guitars played traditional mountain melodies that had the entire community clapping and dancing. Ethan joined a group of children playing tag between the tables, their movements like darting fish in a stream of laughter and shouts. The night deepened, and the festivities reached their peak. No one noticed the pair of golden eyes watching intently from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. No one except Ethan, who paused in his game, transfixed by the luminous gaze that seemed to call to him alone. What happened next occurred so swiftly that witnesses later gave conflicting accounts. A magnificent bobcat, larger than any seen in those parts for decades, with distinctive tufted ears and a coat that shimmered like autumn leaves, emerged from the darkness. Its movements were fluid and purposeful as it strode directly into the center of the celebration. Panic erupted. Parents grabbed for their children, men reached for tools that might serve as weapons, and someone overturned a table in the chaos. The bobcat, however, showed no aggression. It moved with deliberate grace, golden eyes locked on a single target: Ethan Mitchell. "Ethan!" Sarah's scream pierced the night as she pushed through the crowd, watching in horror as the bobcat approached her son. Strangely, Ethan didn't run. He stood perfectly still, as if in a trance, his eyes wide but unafraid. When the bobcat reached him, it circled once around the boy, brushing against his legs like a house cat might. Then, in a movement too quick to prevent, it gently but firmly took hold of Ethan's jacket sleeve with its teeth and began pulling him toward the forest. "Stop it! Someone do something!" Sarah's voice broke with desperation. Bobby Anderson grabbed a hunting rifle from his truck, but Margaret's commanding voice stopped him. "No, don't shoot. Look at the boy." Indeed, something extraordinary was happening. Ethan was neither struggling nor crying out in fear. Instead, he was following the bobcat willingly, his hand now resting on its muscular shoulder, as if the wild predator was simply a guide leading him into the woods. The entire community watched in stunned silence as boy and beast disappeared into the dense forest, the darkness swallowing them completely within seconds. The paralysis that had gripped the crowd broke like a dam. Sarah ran toward the forest edge, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. Bobby was right behind her, rifle now lowered but still in hand. "Ethan! Ethan!" Her cries echoed unanswered through the trees. Margaret's voice carried from behind them, firm despite her age. "Wait, Sarah. The Guardian has chosen him." Sarah whirled around, her face contorted with fear and confusion. "What are you talking about? That wild animal has my son." The old woman made her way slowly towards Sarah, leaning heavily on her carved walking stick. The festivities had completely halted, the once joyous clearing now silent, except for worried murmurs and the occasional sob. "There are stories," Margaret began, her voice carrying easily in the hush, passed down through generations about the bobcats of these mountains. "They're not just animals, Sarah. When danger threatens, they become protectors." Bobby scoffed. "Margaret, with all due respect, we don't have time for legends. That cat could be anywhere by now, and Ethan—" "The bobcat didn't drag him away like prey," Margaret interrupted sharply. "You all saw it. The boy went willingly. When did you last see a wild predator act that way? When did you last see Ethan not fight back against something he feared?" Sarah's breathing calmed slightly as she processed Margaret's words. It was true. The encounter had been bizarre in every way. Ethan hadn't shown any sign of terror, and the bobcat's behavior defied everything she knew about wild animals. "What are you saying?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's eyes reflected the dying flames of the festival bonfire. "I'm saying that your son may have been chosen for protection, not harm. The Guardian only appears when something worse is coming." A chill ran through the gathering that had nothing to do with the autumn night. In the distance, an owl called 3 times, an omen that the elders had long associated with imminent change. "We need to find him," Sarah stated, her voice finding new resolve. "Guardian or not, my son is out there in the dark with a wild animal." Bobby nodded, already organizing the men into search parties. "We'll start immediately. First light is hours away, and those mountains don't forgive mistakes." As flashlights were distributed and walkie-talkies checked, Sarah felt a gentle hand on her arm. Margaret stood beside her, her ancient eyes holding centuries of mountain wisdom. "Have faith, child," the old woman whispered. "There are forces at work in these forests older than our understanding. The Guardian has watched over Whispering Pines since before the first settler built a cabin here." Sarah swallowed hard. torn between maternal panic and a strange, inexplicable sense that Margaret's words held truth. She looked toward the dark wall of trees where her son had disappeared. "Just bring him back to me," she whispered to whatever forces might be listening. "Just bring my Ethan home." The search began in earnest as the festival lights were repurposed into searching beams cutting through the dense Montana forest. Bobby Anderson organized the community with the efficiency of someone who had grown up respecting the wilderness and its dangers. 3 groups formed, each taking a different direction into the mountains, following the most likely paths the bobcat might have taken. "Stay within shouting distance of each other," Bobby instructed, handing out emergency whistles. 3 short blasts if you find anything. 1 long blast if you need help. Sarah refused to join any group that might slow her down. Despite Bobby's protests, she struck out ahead, her botanist's knowledge of the terrain guiding her steps. Her flashlight beam trembled slightly as it swept across the forest floor, searching for any sign of Ethan or the bobcat. "He knows these woods," she repeated to herself like a prayer. "He's smart. He'll leave signs." Behind her, Bobby's deep voice called out Ethan's name, the sound echoing against the mountainsides before being swallowed by the vastness. Other voices joined in, creating a chorus of concern that swept through the valley like a wave. In the Mitchell cabin, Margaret Wilson had established a base of operations. Too old to join the search, she instead pored over old maps spread across Sarah's kitchen table. Candlelight flickered across the yellowed papers, some dating back to the first settlers of Whispering Pines in the late 1800s. "Bring me Sarah's research journals," she instructed Emily Johnson, a young teacher who had volunteered to assist her, the leather-bound ones in her study. As Emily hurried to comply, Margaret's gnarled fingers traced familiar paths through the mountains. The maps showed features long forgotten by modern residents: old mining tunnels, natural shelter caves, and springs that only flowed in certain seasons. Most importantly, they marked areas historically prone to landslides and rockfalls, dangers that changed location but never disappeared entirely from these mountains. When Emily returned with the journals, Margaret began cross-referencing Sarah's botanical observations with the historical maps. "The earth speaks through its plants," she murmured. "Sarah knows this better than anyone else here." Outside, the search continued through the deepening night. Hours passed with no sign of Ethan or the bobcat. The initial adrenaline that had fueled the searches began to wane, replaced by a persistent worry that gnawed at their resolve. The temperature dropped as midnight approached, bringing with it the bite of mountain cold that could prove dangerous to an unprotected child. Sarah paused at a small creek to refill her water bottle, her flashlight catching something that made her heart skip. A small footprint in the mud, fresh enough that water was still seeping into its edges. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. 3 short blasts on her whistle brought Bobby and 2 others crashing through the underbrush moments later. "Look," she pointed, her hand shaking slightly. "These are his tracks. And these..." Her light shifted to larger, distinctive paw prints, alongside the human footprints. Bobby knelt to examine them. "They're walking together," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "The bobcat isn't dragging him." "Just like at the festival," Sarah whispered. "He's following it willingly." One of the other searchers, Mike Collins, a local wildlife guide, studied the tracks with professional interest. "That's one massive bobcat, must be nearly twice the normal size. And look at how it's deliberately placing its paws here, almost like it's showing the boy where to step." The discovery renewed their determination. The search party followed the tracks along the creek until they reached a rocky outcropping, where the trail disappeared. Beyond lay 3 possible paths: a steep uphill climb, a narrow deer trail wrapping around the mountainside, and a descent into a thickly wooded ravine. "We'll need to split up," Bobby decided after a brief consultation. "Mike, Take 2 men and check the high ground. Joe, you and your group follow the deer trail. Sarah and I will take the ravine." As the group separated, Sarah clutched her jacket tighter against the cold. The ravine grew darker as they descended, the trees closing overhead like protective arms. The silence was profound, broken only by their cautious footsteps and occasional calls for Ethan. "Sarah." Bobby's voice was hesitant as they paused to rest. "Margaret mentioned something called the Guardian. What did she mean?" Sarah sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "It's an old legend in these parts. My grandmother used to tell stories about mountain spirits that took the form of bobcats to protect the innocent from danger. Just folklore, Bobby. Something to make children respect the wilderness." Bobby nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Folklore usually has some basis in truth. And what we saw tonight, that wasn't normal bobcat behavior." "Are you saying you believe Margaret?" Sarah's voice held a hint of desperate hope. "I'm saying that in 30 years of hunting these mountains, I've never seen anything like what happened tonight." He adjusted his rifle strap uncomfortably, "and I've never known Margaret Wilson to speak nonsense." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Both froze, listening intently. "Thunder?" Sarah suggested, though the night sky had been clear of clouds. Bobby shook his head slowly. "Sounds like a rock slide, somewhere to the north." The walkie-talkie at his belt crackled to life. Mike's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Bobby, we've got a situation on the high trail. Looks like part of the mountainside just gave way. The path ahead is completely blocked." Bobby's face paled in the flashlight's glow. "Any sign of tracks leading that way?" A pause. "None we can find. But if the boy and the cat had gone this route earlier..." He left the sentence unfinished, but Sarah understood the implication. "If Ethan had been on that path when the rocks fell..." "No," she said firmly, refusing to consider the possibility. "The bobcat took him a different way. I know it." Back at the Mitchell cabin, Margaret jerked upright at the faint sound of the distant rock slide. Emily, who had been dozing in a chair by the fire, startled awake. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed by the sudden tension in the old woman's body. "It's beginning," Margaret said cryptically, her finger resting on a section of map marked with faded warning symbols. "The mountain is waking up." She turned to Sarah's research journal, flipping quickly through pages until she found what she sought. A detailed drawing of a particular type of moss that Sarah had documented growing in unusual patterns along the eastern slopes. "Emily, radio the search parties. Tell them to avoid the eastern ridge paths completely. And tell Sarah to check the old Blackwater cave system. It's where the Guardians have always taken those they protect." Emily hesitated, confused by the urgency in Margaret's voice. "How could you possibly know where they went?" Margaret's ancient eyes, clouded with age but bright with certainty, met Emily's. "Because it's happened before. The bobcat, the warning, the rescue. It's all part of a cycle as old as these mountains." She tapped a weathered newspaper clipping tucked into the map, a yellowed photograph from 1932 showing a young boy standing beside what appeared to be a large bobcat. The headline read, "Local child survives 3 days lost in mountains, claims mountain cat led him to safety." That boy was my brother," Margaret said softly. "A week after he was found, half the eastern slope collapsed in the worst landslide Whispering Pines had ever seen." Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Ethan Mitchell was experiencing something beyond his wildest imagination. The initial shock of being led away from the festival had given way to a strange sense of trust in the magnificent creature guiding him through the wilderness. The bobcat moved with purpose, occasionally looking back with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to communicate, "Follow me, trust me, I know the way." When Ethan stumbled on loose rocks or became tangled in underbrush, the bobcat would pause, circling back to nudge him gently in a different direction. When thirst overcame the boy, the animal led him to a clear spring bubbling from between moss-covered stones. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked aloud, not expecting an answer but needing to break the silence of the forest night. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and it responded with a soft chirruping noise, unlike anything Ethan had heard before. Not threatening, but insistent. As they traveled deeper into the mountains, Ethan noticed strange patterns in their path. The bobcat deliberately avoided certain areas, even when they seemed to offer easier passage. Instead, it chose routes that kept them on solid bedrock or along ridgelines. When exhaustion finally made Ethan's legs too heavy to continue, the bobcat led him to a shallow cave beneath an overhanging rock. The entrance was partially hidden by a curtain of hanging vines, but inside was dry and sheltered from the wind. Curling up against the surprisingly warm fur of his unusual guardian, Ethan finally surrendered to sleep, his last conscious thought a hope that his mother wouldn't worry too much. He didn't know that less than half a mile away, the path they had avoided hours earlier had disappeared beneath tons of shifting rock and earth, exactly where he might have been walking if left to find his own way home. Dawn broke over whispering pines with a soft lavender light that did little to ease the exhaustion of the search parties. Most had continued through the night, their determination fueled by worry and the occasional encouraging sign, a broken twig, disturbed leaves, or what might have been another set of tracks before the rocky terrain obscured them. Sarah refused to rest, despite Bobby's insistence. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but her resolve remained unshaken. Every mother's instinct told her that Ethan was still alive, still moving through these mountains with his unlikely companion. The radio call from Emily changed everything. "The Eastern Ridge, that's where we need to focus," Sarah insisted, studying the crude map Bobby had sketched in his notebook. Margaret mentioned Blackwater Cave. "It's an old system I've documented in my research, but I've never gone deep inside." Bobby frowned. "Those caves haven't been properly explored in decades. They could be unstable after all these years." "If Margaret believes that's where the bobcat is taking Ethan, then that's where we need to go." Sarah's tone left no room for argument. She knows these mountains better than anyone alive. As they redirected their search toward the caves, Ethan was awakening in his rocky shelter, momentarily disoriented before remembering the events of the previous night. The bobcat was no longer beside him, and panic surged through his chest until he spotted the animal at the cave entrance, watching the sunrise with an almost human alertness. "Hey," Ethan called softly. The creature turned its magnificent head, golden eyes assessing him calmly before returning to its vigilant watch. Ethan's stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since the festival. He searched his pockets, finding only a slightly crushed granola bar his mother had insisted he bring, just in case. As he unwrapped it, the bobcat's ears twitched at the crinkling sound. "Wish I had something to share," Ethan apologized, feeling strangely obligated to be polite to the wild animal that had essentially kidnapped him. No sooner had he spoken than the bobcat disappeared into the forest, leaving Ethan alone in the small cave. For a brief moment, he considered trying to find his way back to town, but something, intuition or perhaps the memory of his mother's warnings about getting lost, kept him in place. The bobcat had protected him through the night. Running now seemed both ungrateful and unwise. His patience was rewarded 15 minutes later when the bobcat returned, carrying a freshly caught rabbit in its jaws. The animal dropped its prize at Ethan's feet and stepped back as if waiting. "For me?" Ethan asked, both touched and horrified. He had no way to cook the rabbit and certainly couldn't eat it raw. The bobcat made a soft chirping sound and nudged the rabbit closer. Then, in a display of unexpected intelligence, it used its paw to scrape together a small pile of dry leaves and twigs in the center of the cave floor. Ethan's eyes widened with understanding. "You want me to make a fire?" His father had taught him basic survival skills before his accident 3 years ago, including how to start a fire using natural materials. With shaking hands, Ethan gathered more kindling and searched his pockets, again praying that, yes, the small Swiss Army knife his uncle had given him for his birthday was still there, including its fire starter attachment. It took several frustrating attempts, but eventually a small flame caught, growing steadily, until a modest fire burned in the cave. The bobcat watched with apparent satisfaction as Ethan awkwardly prepared the rabbit, cooking it on a makeshift spit fashioned from a green branch. "I'd give you a 5-star review on Wilderness Yelp," Ethan told the bobcat as he finished his meal, the humor helping to mask his underlying fear and homesickness. The bobcat responded by cleaning its paws fastidiously, looking for all the world like an oversized house cat. After the meal, the bobcat stood and paced restlessly at the cave entrance, clearly wanting to move on. Ethan extinguished the fire, carefully, another lesson from his father, and prepared to follow his guide deeper into the wilderness. Outside, the morning revealed a landscape transformed by the previous night's rock slide. From their elevated position, Ethan could see a massive scar on a distant slope where the earth had given way. The sight sent a chill through him as he realized that the path of destruction lay directly between their current location and the route back to Whispering Pines. "Did you know that was going to happen?" he asked the bobcat, which had paused to let him take in the view. The animal's only response was to blink slowly before turning to lead the way along a narrow ridge that circumvented the danger zone. As they traveled, Ethan began to notice peculiar markings on certain rocks and trees, symbols similar to those he'd mentioned to his mother before the festival. The bobcat seemed to follow these markers, pausing occasionally as if confirming their route. The morning stretched into afternoon as they navigated increasingly rugged terrain. Twice more, they heard the ominous rumble of shifting earth in the distance, and each time the bobcat adjusted their course, leading them along safer paths that Ethan would never have chosen on his own. By mid-afternoon, they reached what appeared to be their destination, the gaping entrance to a large cave, system set into the mountainside. Ancient symbols had been carved into the stone around the entrance, partially obscured by moss and lichen, but still recognizable as the same designs Ethan had seen along their journey. The bobcat hesitated at the entrance, its body language suddenly tense. It made a low growling sound, the first threatening noise Ethan had heard from it, directed not at him, but at something within the cave. "Is it safe?" Ethan whispered, instinctively moving closer to his protector. After a moment, the bobcat relaxed slightly and proceeded into the cave, its tail brushing against Ethan's leg in what felt like reassurance. The boy followed, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the dimness. The cave opened into a vast chamber with a high ceiling, from which water had carved fantastic formations over countless centuries. Shafts of light penetrated through small fissures in the rock above, creating an ethereal atmosphere that made Ethan gasp in wonder. But it wasn't just the natural beauty that caught his attention. Along the walls, illuminated by the scattered beams of sunlight, were paintings, ancient images depicting humans and animals, storms and mountains, all rendered in ochre and charcoal that had somehow survived the passage of time. Ethan moved closer to examine them, his fingers hovering just above the surface without touching, respecting their antiquity. Many of the scenes showed people and bobcats together, some with the cats, leading humans away from stylized depictions of disaster, landslides, floods, forest fires. "These are about you, aren't they?" Ethan whispered to the bobcat, which sat watching him with those intelligent golden eyes. "Your kind has been protecting people for forever." In the far corner of the chamber, Ethan discovered something unexpected. The remains of a small campfire, relatively recent by the look of the ash, and beside it, carved into a flat stone, A message. J. Wilson saved by the Guardian, May 1932. The name Wilson triggered a memory. Margaret Wilson, the elderly woman who had spoken to his mother at the festival. Could this J. Wilson be related to her? Had they also been brought to this cave by a bobcat decades earlier? The bobcat approached, sniffing at the old fire pit before walking to another section of the cave, where a narrow passage led deeper into the mountain. It looked back at Ethan expectantly. "You want me to go in there?" Ethan asked, suddenly nervous about venturing further from the light and air of the main chamber. The bobcat made an encouraging sound and took a few steps into the passage, then waited. Something about its patience, its unwavering commitment to guiding him, gave Ethan the courage to follow. The passage twisted and turned, occasionally opening into smaller chambers before narrowing again. In some places, Ethan had to crouch, or even crawl, but the bobcat always waited, ensuring he navigated each obstacle safely. Finally, they emerged into another large chamber, this one different from the first. A pool of crystal clear water occupied its center, fed by a small waterfall trickling down one wall. The water glowed with an almost supernatural blue light, its surface perfectly still, despite the constant influx from the fall. The bobcat approached the pool and drank deeply before looking up at Ethan. The boy knelt beside his guide and cupped his hands, bringing the cold, sweet water to his lips. It was the most refreshing thing he had ever tasted, seeming to wash away not just his thirst, but also his fear and uncertainty. As he drank, a curious calm settled over him, and with it came understanding. He wasn't just being protected from a random danger, he was being shown something important, something that connected him to the history of these mountains and the people who had lived among them for generations. Meanwhile, the search for Ethan had gained new urgency as reports came in of multiple landslides and ground instability throughout the region. What had begun as concern for one missing child had expanded into worry for the entire community of Whispering Pines. The USGS is reporting seismic activity consistent with a major shift in the underlying fault system. Steve Jenkins, the town's emergency management coordinator, announced to the gathered search teams. "We need to consider evacuating the lower town if this continues." "Oh, not without my son," Sarah stated firmly, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she studied the maps Margaret had marked with potential cave entrances. Bobby placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "We'll find him, Sarah. We're getting closer. I can feel it." A commotion near the command post drew their attention. Mike Collins was running toward them, waving excitedly. "Tracks!" he called out. "Fresh ones, both the boy and the bobcat, heading toward the old Blackwater system, just like Margaret said." Hope surged through Sarah like an electric current. "Show me," she demanded, already gathering her gear. As the newly energized search party prepared to set out, a low rumble, louder than any previous tremor, rolled through the valley. Trees swayed, loose rocks clattered down slopes, and everyone instinctively braced for stability. "That's not good," Bobby muttered, watching as a plume of dust rose from a distant ridge. "We need to move fast." Inside the cave, Ethan also felt the tremor, stronger here in the heart of the mountain. Small stones rained from the ceiling, splashing into the glowing pool and disturbing its perfect surface. The bobcat was instantly alert, its muscles tensed as it assessed their situation. Without warning, the animal lunged forward, pushing Ethan firmly away from the pool and toward a different passage than the one they had entered through. The message was clear. They needed to move, and quickly. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, fear returning as another, stronger tremor shook the cave. The bobcat's only response was another push, more insistent this time. Ethan stumbled forward, into the new passage, trusting his guardian even as the mountain around them seemed to come alive with ominous grumblings. Back on the surface, Sarah led the way toward the Blackwater Caves with single-minded determination. Every maternal instinct told her that Ethan was there, that he needed her now more than ever. What she couldn't possibly know was that her path and her son's were converging, guided by forces much older than human understanding, and a guardian determined to reunite them before the mountain unleashed its full fury. The tremors increased in frequency as Sarah's group approached the Blackwater Cave system, sending small cascades of loose rock skittering down the mountainside. The sky had darkened ominously, heavy clouds gathering, as if the very atmosphere sensed the Earth's unrest below. "We should consider turning back," Steve Jenkins advised, eyeing the unstable slope ahead of them. "These conditions are deteriorating fast." Sarah didn't even slow her pace. "My son is up there." Bobby, keeping stride beside her, nodded in agreement. "We've come too far to turn around now." To Steve, he added, "Radio back to town. Tell them to start precautionary evacuations of the lower valley, just in case." The entrance to the Blackwater Caves loomed ahead, a dark moor in the mountainside partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. Years had passed since anyone from Whispering Pines had ventured inside, besides the occasional adventurous teenager looking for thrills. As they approached, Mike Collins knelt to examine the ground. "Tracks are fresh," he confirmed. "They definitely came this way, and recently." Sarah's heart leaped. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice echoing against the stone. "Ethan, can you hear me?" Only the whisper of the wind answered, carrying with it the distant rumble of thunder, or perhaps another shifting of the earth beneath their feet. "We need lights," Bobby instructed, unshoulder his pack to distribute flashlights and emergency flares. "Stay together once we're inside. These caves can be a maze if you don't know them." Sarah nodded, accepting a flashlight but already moving toward the entrance, unwilling to waste another moment. The ancient symbols carved around the cave mouth caught her attention briefly, the same markings she had documented in her botanical surveys, always found near sites of unusual ecological significance. "Margaret said these were protective sigils," she murmured, running her fingers over the weathered indentations. Warnings and guides combined. Inside the cave, Ethan and the bobcat were moving rapidly through a series of narrow passages, guided by what seemed to be the animal's intimate knowledge of the underground labyrinth. Each time a tremor shook the mountain, sending dust and pebbles showering down. The bobcat would adjust their course, leading Ethan away from sections where the ceiling appeared unstable. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Ethan asked as they paused in a small chamber to catch their breath. The bobcat's golden eyes reflected the dim light filtering through cracks in the stone above, regarding him with what seemed like ancient patience. Their journey through the cave system had revealed more evidence that they weren't the first to travel these paths. In several chambers, Ethan had spotted the same primitive paintings he'd seen earlier, images of bobcats leading humans to safety, away from stylized depictions of natural disasters. One particular drawing had caught his attention, a circular pattern of bobcats surrounding what appeared to be a mountain with wavy lines emanating from within it. Below, tiny human figures were shown following the cats away from the mountain. "They knew," Ethan whispered, understanding dawning slowly. "The people who made these paintings, they knew the mountain would wake up sometimes, and they knew you would warn them." The bobcat made a soft chirruping sound that echoed slightly in the chamber. It approached Ethan and pressed its head briefly against his hand, the first time it had initiated contact that wasn't related to guiding or protecting him, before turning to lead the way once more. They had traveled perhaps another 15 minutes when the bobcat suddenly froze, ears swiveling toward a distant sound that Ethan's human hearing couldn't detect. The animal's posture shifted from cautious to alert, its tail swishing with what appeared to be excitement rather than fear. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "Do you hear something?" As if in answer, the faintest echo reached them. "Ethan!" His name, called in his mother's unmistakable voice, distorted by distance and the cave's acoustics, but definitely real. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. "Mom!" he shouted back, his voice cracking with emotion. "Mom, we're here!" The bobcat didn't seem surprised or alarmed by the human voices. Instead, it moved with new purpose, clearly intending to lead Ethan toward the source of the calls. For the first time since being taken from the festival, Ethan felt tears welling in his eyes, tears of relief, of hope, of the sudden realization of how frightened he had actually been beneath his brave facade. Back, near the cave entrance, Sarah's group had been exploring the main chamber when Ethan's distant reply reached them like a gift. "That's him," Sarah gasped, gripping Bobby's arm so tightly her knuckles went white. "He's alive!" "Ethan!" Multiple voices called out now, trying to guide the boy toward them through sound alone. Their joy was short-lived, however, as the strongest tremor yet shook the cave, dislodging a shower of rocks from the ceiling. Bobby pulled Sarah backward just as a large stone crashed to the ground where she had been standing. "This isn't safe," Steve insisted, ducking as more debris rained down. "We need to get out of here now, all of us." "Not without Ethan," Sarah and Bobby replied in unison. Mike, who had been studying the cave walls with his flashlight, suddenly called their attention. "Look at this! These paintings, they're showing exactly what's happening now." The others gathered around, their lights illuminating a section of wall covered in ancient images. The central figure was unmistakably a bobcat, larger than life, leading small human figures away from a mountain that appeared to be breaking apart. "It's a warning system," Mike marveled, his voice hushed with awe. These paintings weren't just art. They were recording previous events, leaving information for future generations. Sarah's scientific mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed until now. Margaret was right. The bobcats really are guardians. They've been protecting the people of this valley for generations, warning them when the mountain becomes unstable. A soft scraping sound drew their attention to a narrow passage leading deeper into the cave system. All flashlights swung in that direction, illuminating two pairs of eyes reflecting the light back at them. One human, one feline. "Ethan!" Sarah cried, rushing forward as her son emerged from the passage, the massive bobcat padding silently at his side. Mother and son collided in a fierce embrace, both crying openly now. The bobcat stepped back, watching the reunion with what could only be described as satisfaction in its intelligent golden eyes. "Mom, you won't believe what happened," Ethan began breathlessly. "The bobcat. It knew the mountain was going to collapse. It's been protecting me, showing me the safe paths, even finding me food and water." Sarah held her son at arm's length, scanning him for injuries before pulling him close again. "I believe it," she whispered into his hair. "Margaret told us about the guardians, but I didn't understand until now." Bobby approached cautiously, his gaze fixed on the bobcat. The animal returned his stare calmly, showing no fear or aggression, despite the presence of multiple humans in what was clearly its domain. "It's the biggest bobcat I've ever seen," he murmured. "Must be twice the normal size." "Her name is Artemis," Ethan announced, with the certainty of someone sharing an established fact rather than a personal theory. "How do you know that?" Sarah asked, surprised. Ethan shrugged. "I just know. She told me, kind of. Not in words, but..." He struggled to explain the connection he had formed with the animal over their time together. Another tremor, stronger than any before, interrupted their reunion. Dust and small stones showered down from the ceiling, and a distant crack echoed through the cave system like a gunshot. "We need to leave," Steve insisted. "Now." The bobcat, Artemis, seemed to agree. She moved toward the cave entrance, looking back to ensure the humans were following. Her message was clear. The mountain was becoming increasingly dangerous. She wants us to follow her, Ethan explained unnecessarily, as everyone could read the animal's intentions. As they made their way back toward the entrance, guided by the bobcat's confident lead, another realization struck Sarah. Ethan, did you notice which direction Artemis is taking us? Not back the way we came in, but toward the north face. Bobby consulted his compass and frowned. She's right. We're heading away from town. There must be a reason, Sarah said, trusting now in the animal's ancient wisdom. The bobcat didn't bring Ethan all this way, just to lead us into danger. True, to Sarah's faith, Artemis guided them through a series of passages that eventually opened onto a different side of the mountain entirely, emerging through a narrow fissure that would have been easy to miss from the outside. As they exited the cave system, the reason for the detour became horrifyingly clear. The view before them showed the valley where whispering pines nestled and the massive landslide that had occurred on the south face of the mountain, precisely where their original entry point had been. Tons of rock and earth had broken free, cascading down toward the edges of town. If they had attempted to exit the way they entered, they would have been directly in its path. My God, Bobby breathed, taking in the scale of the natural disaster. The entire south face gave way. Artemis knew, Ethan said simply, resting his hand on the bobcat's muscular shoulder. That's why she brought me here, away from where the mountain would fall. And that's why she led us out this way instead of back the way you came in. Another tremor rumbled through the ground beneath their feet, subtle but persistent. Artemis tensed, her attention focusing on the northern ridge where they currently stood. I don't think it's over, Sarah warned, interpreting the bobcat's body language. We need to get down from here and back to town. Bobby was already on, his radio coordinating with the emergency teams in Whispering Pines. South face collapse confirmed, he reported. We've got the boy, he's safe. Everyone else needs to evacuate to the emergency shelter at the high school immediately. As they began their careful descent from the northern ridge, Sarah couldn't help but notice how Artemis stayed close to Ethan, occasionally nudging him away from certain paths or guiding him toward others. The animal's actions showed not just intelligence, but genuine concern, as if the boy had become part of something the bobcat was sworn to protect. Mom, Ethan said quietly as they picked their way down the slope. The cave was full of paintings and carvings about the bobcats protecting people. Some of them looked really, really old. How long do you think this has been happening? Sarah gazed thoughtfully at Artemis, who was currently a few paces ahead, scouting their route. Maybe since humans first came to this valley, she suggested. Maybe even before. Some relationships between species develop over thousands of years. Like a mutual agreement, Ethan nodded, surprising his mother with his insight. The people respect the mountain and the forest, and in return, the guardians warn them when danger is coming. The group fell silent as they continued their descent, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed and experienced. The only sounds were their cautious footsteps on loose shale and the occasional distant rumble as the mountain continued its geological reshaping. Behind them, a massive plume of dust rose from the south face, where another section had given way, confirming the wisdom of Artemis's guidance. Whatever force had woken within the mountain was still active, still dangerous, and without the bobcat's intervention, Ethan might have been directly in its path when the first slides began. As they approached the valley floor, they could see emergency vehicles and townspeople gathered at the designated safe zone near the high school. A cheer went up as the group was spotted, word quickly spreading that Ethan Mitchell had been found safe. Artemis paused at the edge of the tree line, her golden eyes surveying the human gathering below with caution. Ethan stopped beside her, aware that their journey together was coming to its end. "Thank you," he whispered, kneeling to look directly into those ancient eyes. "You saved my life." The bobcat returned his gaze with what seemed like understanding, before gently pressing her forehead against his. a gesture of connection that transcended the boundaries between their species. Then, with a final look at the boy she had protected, Artemis turned and melted back into the forest, her tawny coat disappearing among the shadows of the pines. Ethan watched her go, feeling both loss and gratitude. He knew somehow that this wasn't truly goodbye, that Artemis and the other guardians would always be there, watching over whispering pines from the ancient forests that surrounded it. As he rejoined his mother and the others for the final walk into town, Ethan glanced back once more at the mountain that had nearly claimed him. Its peak stood silent against the clearing sky, a reminder of nature's power and the unexpected allies that helped humans survive in its presence. "She'll be back," he said with quiet certainty, "whenever we need her." Sarah squeezed his hand, no longer doubting her son's connection to the guardian of the mountain. "Yes," she agreed softly, "I believe she will." The weeks following what Whispering Pines now called the Great Slide were filled with recovery efforts and a profound reassessment of the community's relationship with the wilderness that surrounded them. Miraculously, no lives had been lost, a fact attributed to the early warnings and evacuations, but also, in whispered conversations, to the intervention of an ancient guardian. Ethan Mitchell had become something of a local celebrity. Children and adults alike sought him out to hear firsthand the tale of his journey with Artemis. Each time he told the story, Sarah noticed, he included more details about the cave paintings, the ancient symbols, and the history of protection that seemed woven into the very fabric of their mountain home. 3 weeks after the landslide, as the community gathered for an impromptu town meeting in the high school gymnasium, Mayor Patricia Anderson officially recognized what many had already come to accept. For generations, our town has benefited from a relationship with the natural world that goes beyond mere coexistence, she announced from the makeshift podium. The events of last month have reminded us of what some families, like the Wilsons, have known for decades. The bobcats of these mountains are not just wildlife to be respected from a distance, but guardians whose wisdom and instincts have repeatedly saved lives in our community. Margaret Wilson, seated in a place of honor at the front of the gathering, nodded in quiet satisfaction. At 93, she had lived long enough to see her family's superstitions validated in the most dramatic way possible. Therefore, the mayor continued, "I am proposing the creation of the Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary encompassing the northern forests and Blackwater Mountain to ensure that these remarkable animals and their habitat are protected for generations to come." The proposal was met with enthusiastic applause and approved by unanimous vote. Sarah, sitting with Ethan and Bobby in the middle rows, felt a surge of professional excitement. As the town's resident botanist, she would play a key role in documenting and preserving the ecosystem that supported their unexpected allies. "Mom," Ethan whispered as the meeting moved on to logistics and funding discussions, "can we go back to the caves someday? I want to document all the paintings and symbols properly. It's important." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Absolutely, but this time we go together, with proper equipment and permission." After the meeting dispersed, Margaret made her way slowly toward them, her ancient eyes bright with purpose. "Young Mr. Mitchell," she addressed Ethan formally, though her voice was warm, "I believe you and I need to have a conversation about what it means to be chosen by a guardian." Ethan straightened, instinctively recognizing the significance of the moment. "Yes, Mom. My brother Jacob was the last person to be guided by a bobcat before you," Margaret continued. "He documented his experience extensively, including details about the cave system and the relationship between our people and the mountain guardians. I've kept his journals all these years, waiting for the right person to pass them to." She reached into her large handbag and withdrew a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age but carefully preserved. "I believe these belong with you now. Ethan accepted the journal with reverence, understanding the trust being placed in him. "Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I'll take good care of them." Jacob always believed he was shown the caves for a reason, not just to save his life, but to preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Margaret's gnarled hand rested briefly on the journal. "I suspect your purpose is similar, young man." As spring melted into summer, the town of Whispering Pines underwent a transformation that went beyond the physical repairs to damaged infrastructure. A new appreciation for the wilderness emerged, coupled with a determination to understand and honor the unique relationship between the human community and the guardian bobcats. Sarah's research took on new dimensions as she collaborated with wildlife biologists from the State University to study the unusually large bobcats native to their region. Genetic testing confirmed what many had suspected. These were not ordinary Lynx rufus, but a specialized subspecies that had evolved in isolation within the Blackwater mountain range. They're larger, with enhanced problem-solving abilities and social behaviors not typically seen in other bobcat populations, Dr. Elaine Carter explained during a presentation to the town council. The isolation of this valley and the unique geological features have essentially created a microevolution laboratory. These animals have adapted specifically to this environment and to the humans within it. Ethan, who had been permitted to attend the scientific briefing, raised his hand. Could that explain how Artemis knew exactly where the landslides would happen and how to navigate the cave system? Dr. Carter nodded approvingly. Excellent question. We believe these bobcats have developed heightened sensitivity to geological disturbances. Perhaps they can detect subtle vibrations or changes in air pressure that precede major events. As for the caves, evidence suggests these animals have used them as dens and refuge points for countless generations, creating a kind of inherited memory map. Not just memory, Ethan suggested quietly. Wisdom. The scientist smiled, not dismissing the boy's philosophical take. Perhaps that's exactly what evolution creates, given enough time and the right conditions. Summer brought tourists to Whispering Pines, more than the small town had seen in decades. News of the guardian bobcats had spread through wildlife enthusiast circles and social media, drawing visitors hoping to catch a glimpse of the remarkable animals or tour the now famous Blackwater caves. Sarah and Bobby, with support from the New Wildlife Sanctuary Committee, developed strict guidelines to protect both the bobcats and their habitat from excessive human interference. Guided tours of the cave's outer chambers were permitted, but the deeper sections, including the sacred pool Ethan had discovered, remained restricted, accessible only to researchers and specially trained guides. Ethan himself had been appointed the youngest ever junior ranger for the sanctuary, a position created specifically to honor his connection to Artemis and his growing expertise on the cave paintings and local lore. Each weekend, he led educational programs for visitors, sharing the story of his rescue, while emphasizing the importance of respecting the delicate balance between human needs and wilderness preservation. The bobcats don't just protect us from landslides, he explained to a group of wide-eyed children and their parents one warm July afternoon. They're protecting us from forgetting something important, that we're part of this mountain, not separate from it. As he spoke, Sarah noticed a flicker of movement at the edge of the forest behind the visitors' center. A tawny shape melted briefly into view before disappearing again among the trees, Artemis watching over her chosen human from a distance. The bobcat had been spotted occasionally since the landslide, always near enough to be recognized, but far enough to maintain her wild independence. That evening, as Sarah and Ethan walked home along the newly established sanctuary trail, her son's contemplative silence prompted a gentle inquiry. "Something on your mind, sweetheart?" Ethan kicked a pine cone thoughtfully. I've been reading Jacob Wilson's journals. He wrote that after his experience with the bobcat, he could sometimes understand things about the mountain, like he had a connection to it that other people didn't. Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. I think I feel it too, Mom. Yesterday I was leading a tour group, and I just knew we needed to turn back early. There was nothing obvious wrong, just a feeling. An hour later, a tree fell right across the path where we would have been walking. Instead of dismissing this as coincidence or imagination, Sarah considered it seriously. Your father used to say that humans have lost a lot of their natural instincts by living in cities and depending on technology. Maybe your time with Artemis helped you reconnect with abilities we all have deep down, but rarely use. Ethan brightened at her acceptance. That's what Jacob wrote too. He said the Guardian doesn't give new gifts, it awakens what's already there. They walked in companionable silence for a while before Ethan spoke again. I want to be a biologist like you, Mom, but also like Dr. Carter. I want to understand the science behind all of this, not just the stories. Sarah felt a surge of pride at her son's aspirations. The traumatic experience with the landslide could have left him fearful of nature. Instead, it had deepened his connection to the natural world and ignited a passion for understanding it. I think you'll make an exceptional biologist, she told him, meaning every word. Autumn returned to Whispering Pines, painting the forests in brilliant golds and reds. 1 year after the event that had changed their community forever, the town held its Autumn Equinox Festival once again in Founder's Clearing, the same location where Artemis had first appeared to take Ethan. The celebration had been expanded to include a special ceremony honoring the Mountain Guardians, complete with educational displays about bobcat conservation and the new sanctuary. Ethan, now 11, had been asked to speak briefly about his experience. As twilight descended and the festival lights twinkled against the darkening sky, Ethan stood before his friends and neighbors, momentarily overwhelmed by the attention. He caught his mother's encouraging smile from the front row and took a deep breath. A year ago, I was taken from this very spot by a bobcat twice the size of any I'd ever seen, he began, his young voice growing stronger with each word. Most people thought she meant to harm me. Even I was scared at first. But Artemis, that's her name, was actually saving my life. He described the journey. Through the forest, the shelter in the cave, and the ancient paintings that documented centuries of similar rescues. The crowd listened in rapt silence, many having heard pieces of the story, but never the full account from Ethan himself. The most important thing I learned, he concluded, wasn't just that bobcats can be protectors instead of threats. It was that sometimes what looks like danger is actually salvation in disguise. And that wisdom, knowing the difference, that's what the Guardians have been teaching the people of this valley since before there even was a Whispering Pines. Applause erupted as he stepped back from the microphone, but a sudden hush fell over the gathering as attention shifted to the edge of the clearing. There, partially illuminated by the festival lights, stood Artemis, her golden eyes reflecting the artificial glow as she surveyed the celebration with regal composure. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, with deliberate grace, the bobcat dipped her head slightly, an acknowledgement that left witnesses with the uncanny feeling that she had understood every word of Ethan's speech. As smoothly as she had appeared, Artemis melted back into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind a community forever changed by her intervention. The festival resumed, but with a new energy, a sense of living within a story much larger and older than any individual present. Children begged to hear more about the Bobcat Guardians, and adults found themselves exchanging their own stories of unexplained forest encounters and strange animal behaviors that suddenly made more sense within this new framework of understanding. Later that night, as the celebration wound down and families headed home under a canopy of stars, Sarah and Ethan lingered in the clearing, watching the last of the festival lights being packed away. "Do you think she came to check on me?" Ethan asked, still processing Artemis's unexpected appearance. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think she came to remind us all that she's still watching, that the agreement between her kind and ours continues, regardless of how much time passes or how our town changes." "I'm going to write my own journal," Ethan decided, "like Jacob Wilson did, so future generations will remember too." Sarah wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders, feeling a profound gratitude for the wild guardian who had not only saved Ethan's life, but had also awakened something precious within him, a connection to the natural world that would shape his path forward. As they walked home through the quiet streets of Whispering Pines, the distant silhouette of Blackwater Mountain rose against the star-filled sky, no longer just a backdrop to their lives, but a living presence with ancient protectors and wisdom etched into its very stone. In the forest beyond the town limits, Artemis moved silently through familiar territories, her keen senses attuned to every subtle shift and tremor in the mountain she guarded. The human cub she had chosen was growing well, beginning to understand the messages written in stone and tree and water. Generations would pass, mountains would shift, forests would change, but the covenant between guardians and those they protected would endure, as it had since time immemorial in this valley of whispers and ancient promises. The legacy of the guardian would continue, passed down through stories, science, and the unexplainable bond between a boy and a bobcat who had changed an entire community's understanding of what it meant to truly belong to a place and to be protected by its most unexpected champions. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Ethan and Artemis has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. The connection between humans and the natural world often holds mysteries and wisdom beyond our understanding, waiting to be discovered through unexpected encounters. If you enjoyed this journey through Whispering Pines and the legacy of the guardian bobcats, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your support allows us to continue bringing these emotionally rich stories to life. We've created a special playlist featuring similar tales of extraordinary connections between humans and the natural world, which you can find by clicking the link to your left. Each story explores the profound ways in which nature guides, protects, and teaches us, if only we learn to listen. What unexpected guardian has appeared in your life? Share your experiences in the comments below. We read every single one and find inspiration in your stories. Until our paths cross again in another tale, remember that sometimes what appears to be danger may actually be salvation in disguise.